Hello and welcome back to the channel. LC here, back with part 2 of our Tellius Retrospective Series for Fire Emblem. Today we will be taking a look at what are the strongest characters in Path of Radiance. Now this game's been out for the better part of about 20 years, so a lot of this information is known. You know, we're not going to be reinventing the wheel here. So the goal here is for anybody that's getting into this game, or if the game does eventually get remastered, to give them a pretty general idea as to who the strongest characters are. Because the way Fire Emblem is, and you only have a finite amount of experience, you don't really want to sink too much time and effort into units that really aren't going to serve you well in the end. And Path of Radiance is one of the more balanced titles, but I think that this is going to be a guide for people just kind of trying to get a feel, you know, not too in-depth. You know, we're not going to be super sweaty, maniac mode and stuff like that. This entire guide is going to be predicated around just pick up standard, general, normal usage. That's the entire predication of this entire guide that we're going to be doing. So we're going to be discussing unit strengths, what makes them stand out from the pack, how to make them better, and what their weaknesses are. You know, there's not any character in this game that's completely infallible, so we'll be discussing that as well. So if you are new here and you enjoy the content, make sure you like, comment, subscribe, and I want to know what you guys think down in the comments. What are your top 15 or even your top characters in Fire Emblem? I did do a poll over on Reddit, so a lot of this information comes from just kind of research and kind of speaking to the Fire Emblem community, checking out other guides and stuff like that. Just really great ones out. Shout out to people like Mecha. They have really in-depth guides, and I kind of wanted to just kind of put my own spin on it. So that's the entire purpose of this video. So let's go ahead and jump into it. Path of Radiance comes in at a total of 46 playable characters and definitely holds one of the more unique distinctions of having one of the most balanced rosters in most strategy RPGs in history. Almost any unit in this game can be made to work if you're committed to dumping enough bonus EXP into them and feeding them knockouts during battle. But alas, there will always be the cream of the crop, the best of the best, the upper crust if you will. So I've narrowed it down to 15 characters that lead the pack in Path of Radiance and why. So let's kick this thing off talking about Cavalry. Now, coming from older Fire Emblem titles, one of the first things you're going to immediately notice is that the Canto skill for Cavalry units is quite dominant. You know what I mean? In this title and Radiant Dawn, Cavalry is just kind of ridiculous. The ability to attack and then retreat safely afterwards make these units an extremely dominant force on the field from the very first chapter right until the bitter end and the credits start rolling. So to start us off with this class, we have Tatania, who has a very compelling argument for being the strongest character in this entire game on any difficulty. Slotting into the group as one of the few pre-promoted units you actually get near the beginning of the game and you keep her for the entire duration of the game, her utility is beyond superb and at times a necessity in order to avoid unnecessary unit losses in some of the harder earlier chapters. Rocking some impressive base and growth stats respectively, she is an absolute force of nature on the field. She can mow down enemies with absolute ease and has access to spears and axes, so she really doesn't have to play the whole triangle game too much. She can really pick and be advantageous as to what target she truly wants to go after. That's something that a lot of characters don't have right at the beginning of the game. She'll pretty much consistently double most enemies until very late game if she encounters some very poor RNG stats with her growths. And then the absolute cherry on top is that she does eventually get a support with Ike after a lot of chapters, way too many chapters in my opinion, but these two together, because they're probably going to be on the field most of the time, become extremely dominant. So that is just a cherry on top. She's pretty much the goddess of this game. There's no reason not to use her. One of the best characters for sure. And then moving on, we have possibly the kindest person in the Grail Mercenaries besides Reese, and the oldest of the green-haired trio, Oscar. And what can we say about the young lad? He's an absolutely solid unit. Being a Lance Knight, he does well throughout the entire game's early, late, and mid, where there's a fair amount of sword masters in order for him to gain experience with. Oscar having very solid growth in HP, speed, strength, and skill, so even if he gets screwed over with the bad promotions with, you know, leveling up and everything like that, he can still end up being beyond serviceable. Also, one of the few characters in the game boasting Earth Affinity. If you pair him with somebody like Ike as well, they can easily frontline for a lot of the early chapters and just kind of hold down choke points. Those two together are quite insane. It creates like 40% avoid if I'm not mistaken, and they just become a right menace on the field together. And now we have Boyd. Let's talk about the middle child. Now, if Boyd doesn't end up on most players' lists of best characters in this game, that's actually completely understandable. He can definitely get screwed pretty badly by his growth, and it can be very difficult to utilize late game without some bonus EXP love. However, having access to steel axes makes him one of the heaviest hitters in the game from early until very late. The fact that you can actually wield axes at E rank, steel axes, is pretty silly. If you do end up kind of getting screwed over with some of his promotions, he's absolutely going to be in the club where you need to get him a custom weapon and just kind of give that to him in order to make sure he can double consistently and that he doesn't have any issues actually performing well on battle. So he's not a bad unit at all. I wouldn't say he's one of the best, but I definitely think he was worth a note here for sure. And now we have Kian, our other resident Axe Knight. A bit like a mini Tatania, so if the red-haired maven of the Grail Mercenaries really wasn't to your taste for whatever reason, or if you're trying to make your run a bit more challenging by just not using her outright, might I suggest this guy clad in red armor instead. Like Oscar, he comes with solid base stats and growths, which make him pretty formidable on the field, even prior to his promotion. He does also come with a very convenient support with Oscar, pairing them together. You hear this a lot, Earth Affinities in the Tellius series, specifically, Path of Radiance is quite good, you know what I mean? So if you pair any of the people with Oscar, Ike, or anything like that, their evasion's going to go through the roof, and it just kind of creates them into a completely different character. So you'll hear me saying that quite a bit as well. So if you do end up pairing him with Oscar, you can definitely make it so that they're almost practically unhittable. The Void is pretty good. And lastly, to round out our Cavalry units, we have Kind-Eyed Astrid. The only actual bow knight that we have in this game actually has a great deal of potential due to her Paragon skill. This allows her to double any EXP that she receives and can easily help her catch up with the rest of the pack as you acquire her a bit later in the game. I'll be honest with you guys, out of the 6 playthroughs I've had in this game, I think I've only used her like twice. I don't typically field this character in this game, but her potential is outright undeniable. You can't say that this is a bad character. She has everything you need in order to make her work. If you're willing to feed her enough kills and put her into advantageous positions to say like slay Raven Lagoos, she will definitely pull her weight effortlessly on your squad. Another candidate for a potential custom weapon, if you find that the regular items that you're picking up just aren't allowing her to hit hard enough, I would recommend getting her a custom weapon as well. And then moving on to our next section, we have the wing units. So if you thought cavalry units in this game were absolutely cracked out, well, step aside, boys, because the flying units in this game are absolutely disgusting. This is one of those rare situations I don't genuinely think that the developers really took into consideration how much of the game is absolutely trivialized by having at least 1 or 2 of these units on the field at any given time. So let's start with the list of what these units can do. They ignore terrain issues that most other units can't traverse. You see this? Now, why would any unit need to be right there? Why are you allowing them to be right there? Now, this is fixed in Radiant Dawn, but this is extremely abusable in this title. They can also employ hit and run guerrilla tactics that enemy units can't really do anything about, and I also find that they're the best units to rescue other team members and get them safely out of range. Anytime that somebody's in a really sicky situation, send one of your flyers over there, pick them up, come back. It's just, it never gets old because it's such a powerful tactic. Really, enough said, they're just pretty silly. So to start us off with, we have Har. Now, while Har isn't anywhere near the absolute menace that he is in Radiant Dawn, we'll get to that in the next part of our Tellius Retrospective Series, he is a solid unit that offers decent stats and gives you another axe expert into your fold. His stats and growth are kind of basic, and being a very late game addition means that you gonna have to dump a lot of bonus EXP into him to get him up to snuff. But I found that once you get him there, he's actually quite good, just due to the fact that the Wyvern lords in this game are just insane. All the winged units are already insane, so he's already going to be a cut above everybody else, even if he's probably one of the less impressive flyers in this game. So yeah, he ends up being a pretty strong unit. And now we have Marsha. Now Marsha, I think, is probably was my favorite character in my first time I ever played this game. I couldn't believe that she could just like fly through and just like kind of destroy everything. She's pretty damn good. This is before I really understood like just why she was really good. I just was like, oh, she's barely getting hit. She's pretty damn good. But now that I've played the game a million more times and I've kind of done a bit more research, I understand why she is so good. A super clutch unit early game where flyers are quite scarce, she is a key component in many objective based maps, and due to you getting her relatively early in the game, it's quite easy to make her a very dominant force on the field due to her higher than average durability and strength than say a Tanith or Sigurd. So having good speed and strength when it's all said and done, she's almost a constant on every single playthrough that I have. I always use her. She's just incredibly good. But the only thing with her, just be careful with her low HP count, that you can definitely get clipped, especially in the higher difficulties, hard and maniac mode. She can definitely get bodied. it can happen to you. Don't think that she's invincible. And moving on, we have the Redhead Mistress of Talrega and one of the most abusable units in the game, Jill. Essentially being a tankier version of Marsha, she has excellent damage and double potential from the time you get her until the end of the game. She's kind of like a ripped version of Marsha. So imagine Marsha, but if she hit the gym every day. She kind of is equated in my head to like a aerial version of Tatania after being promoted. God mode unit is absolutely God mode. User. And then for our other Pegasus user, we have Tanith. Reinforced is fucking hilarious. Now, despite having one of the cooler designs in the game and that sick ass storm sword, I only actually used her in like maybe 1 or 2 playthroughs, mainly due to her absolute suspect availability during the game. Having high strength and skill growth, she'll be able to get stun off pretty frequently. But the thing that single-handedly puts her on this list is the absolutely insane reinforceability. Her ability to call upon 3 red shirts to come into battle and serve as distractions while you get your units out of harm's way or to bait bosses out into the open, they are quite invaluable. The only drawback is that they could potentially soak up some very valuable experience points out there on the field, so using them kind of recklessly could definitely be at the overall detriment to your team, so utility will be key here. And then moving on, we have Swordmaster. So let's start with the man who's actually on the front of the box, Ike. So Ike is a pretty decent character. He has better than average gross. He's force deployed, so he's obviously going to be pretty good. He suffers from what I call main character syndrome. You know, they start off pretty okay, then they get more better and better, but by the end of the game, they're completely cracked out. And that's essentially him in a nutshell. The only real big issues with him is that he only has one square, you know, that he can attack in front of. Doesn't really have any ranged weapons or stuff like that, and the ranged weapons for swords in this game aren't that awesome until you get Ragnar. When he gets Ragnar, I think he's insane. Like all the chapters after you get Ragnar, I think there's like 3 or 4 chapters after that, you can just solo the whole map with him. Ragnar plus Ether just makes him insane. Like I literally just did like the last 2 maps with just him by himself. Like you don't really need anybody else. It make him really, really OP, and it does fix one of the main issues that he has, is that he didn't have any ranged attacks. And storm swords and stuff like that, and sonic swords in this game are kind of trash. I don't think they're good at all. They're okay, but definitely compared to like a javelin or something like that, they're harder to come by. They have like lower, I think they have like 15 durability and stuff like that, so you can't really be using them every round. So once you get Ragnar, it fixes a ton of his issues, right? But for the effort that you put into Ike, he will deliver it back in spades. One of the best characters in the game. And then moving on to our other Swordmaster, we have my favorite character in the game, the coolest character in the game, I would definitely say Stefan. Now Stefan is just a cool guy. Although being a mid-game addition, he comes lock loaded and ready to go. He requires virtually no investment. His only real downside is a lack of range options for certain encounters, which can be troublesome in higher difficulties. In a standard playthrough, his evasion and critical rating are more than sufficient to mow down legions of enemies with ease, and his growth rates are pretty solid, allowing him to trigger Astrid at a pretty decent rate. This is actually probably one of the few characters in the game that I have to actually keep buying weapons for. You know what I mean? Like, he's just that dominant. Use him. And then moving on to our next section, we have mages. Now, I don't think that mages in Path of Radiance are particularly impressive at all, except for maybe the Fat Man in Trial Mode. That's it. So we're going to cover the 4 that I think are worth noting in tandem. Now, Sauron is typically considered to be the strongest and most reliable of all the mages due to his very early recruitment and his decent adept skill. However, due to the weight of tomes in the Tellius series, this can definitely make his low strength somewhat problematic early game. Another downfall that he has is a rather limited movement range of 5, which can cause issues with allowing him to keep up and stay in the fray. In the end, his fortitude on the battlefield will live and die based off the RNG gods and level up his growth. So he can definitely hit pretty hard. He's pretty versatile. He can learn a couple different, wind, fire, electricity, stuff like that. So most people tend to use him. If they're going to use a mage, they end up using Sauron just because he's there from the beginning. You have a chance to level him up. You can feed him kills and stuff like that. So he's normally the one that most people pick. And then moving on, we have the very lovely Ileana, who is our resident Thunder Mage and who also is available very early in the story. Boasting a higher strength growth than Sauron means that on average she can hit much harder than him, but this comes at a direct detriment of her speed. Sauron is the faster of the two. Honestly, this trade-off just comes down to a matter of preference, and if you're having a lot of issues with Dragon Lagoos towards the end of the game, she can absolutely shred them, and she can also get access to Rex Bolt. If you work her from the beginning of the game to the end, she can definitely shred. So it depends when it comes to those two. Now for the last two, we have Torment, who I don't really consider to be a top-tier character, but I did think that with discussion, it was worth noting him. Just due to the frequency of Beast Lagoos that you have in this game, there are a lot of fucking Beast Lagoos you have to fight in this game. And him being a fire mage, he can absolutely shred them, and that's easy to feed kills to him. So if you're just looking for that, and then the other thing that separates him is celerity, which gives him 2+ movement as well. So if you find that Sauron is kind of lagging behind, or you're having issues with Beast Lagoos or something like that, Torment might work out better for you. I definitely don't think he's as good as Sauron or Ileana, but it's worth noting what his strengths are. And then lastly, we have Khalil, who is just like a mage version of Stefan. She comes lock loaded and ready to go. She doesn't really need much in order to excel, and she has access to some of the higher tomes. I believe she comes in all 4 at B, so all 4 elements at B, so she's ready to go. She can also utilize some of the higher end like siege tomes, so she's good, she's ready to go. But since you get her so late, it really is a trade-off. What matters to you? To me, I very, very rarely use her. I use her a bit more in Radiant Dawn, but I did not use her a lot in Path of Radiance. So I would say the best is still Sauron, Ileana, and then Khalil, and then also put Torment last, depending on your playstyle. So that's it for Sages. So let's cap this all off with talking about our resident furries, Gang. So let's start off with the White Prince Racing. Definitely one of the most unique characters that I've ever come across in any strategy game, definitely for the Fire Emblem series as well. His ability of Galar allows him to essentially revitalize another character so they can go twice in one turn. As you can imagine, it's extraordinarily powerful. And when he form shifts, anybody within his direct vicinity, all 4 of them get to go again, which is just fucking broken. I don't know what else to say. He does have his very direct drawbacks, right? If he gets hit by anything, he's dead. And rightfully so. You know what I mean? Something that powerful definitely needs to be kept in check. He has pretty decent luck and avoid and everything like that. So he can like avoid maybe 1 hit. But if you put him in a situation where he has to, avoid more than 1 hit, he's probably dead. But his unique ability definitely makes him one of the best characters in the game. Probably like top 3. Because it actually just allows you to completely change the game's inner workings. You know what I mean? Like you can just play completely riskier or just more methodically, knowing that you still have that mulligan. You can still, move this person, stuff like that. It's just too damn good. That just puts him on this list by itself. Now, before we go any further, it is well known that the Laguz Royals are generally considered to be the best units in this game. Gifka, Tibarn, and Asala are just fucking broken. Asala definitely the weakest of the 3. Gifka the strongest of the 3, and Tibarn can keep up if you kind of feed him kills throughout that last level. But they pretty much they beat everybody else, pretty handily, except for maybe Ragnar, Ike, Jill, and maybe, Tatania. Maybe that's the only ones that probably compete with them, but they're completely busted. So I'm not going to even include them because it's a well-known thing, and you only get them for 1 level. So I think that's pretty much it. We've said enough about them, to be honest. So the other 2 final inclusions, we'll have to do this together. It's going to be Mordecai and Miriam. So I think that these 2 characters, I don't traditionally use them too much. I did a bit of testing on my last run. So let's start with Mordecai. So Mordecai, actually you get him pretty early. You know what I mean? He's not up to he's not up to par with the Laguz Royals. We all know that. I think having him early on gives you the opportunity to level him up before he faces some really stiff competition for deployment slots late game. He has extremely impressive strength and HP stats, and his growth, stats, I think can actually help him keep up to be kind of end game ready. The only thing that kind of holds him back is his resistance, but his HP is so high that it slightly offsets that. He can probably take a hit or 2 before he's completely dead. The other thing I really like about Mordecai is his smite ability. Ability to knock a unit 2 squares away is pretty fucking good. I think it's extraordinarily good. And it helps him not just be an empty character slot on the turns where he can't transform, right? If you didn't give him Laguz Sun or something like that, he just literally has to wait it out. He can only smite people, which is pretty good. And then the other one's going to be Mr. Demiban, Miriam. I think he's a pretty decent addition to this entire squad, and he's the only other Laguz I find personally worth fielding, end game, in most games. If you dump some bonus EXP into him, he's more than serviceable at getting the job done, and he can definitely be a pretty prominent force on the field in game. Footage here is, Twisted Tower, this is match for the end of the game, and I really just dumped some bonus EXP into him. He was doing work, you know what I mean? So I definitely think he's worth giving a spin. So that'll be it for our Fire Emblem best characters in a game. Again, this is meant for just a traditional standard playthrough, so this is not predicated off maniac mode or super sweaty hard mode or something like that. This is if a regular Joe just picks up the game, wants to play it, wants to know what the best characters are, pretty quick, clean, and easy, concise manner. This is what that is. So until next time, LC signing out. I'll see you guys in part 3 of the Tellius Retrospective Series. Peace.